Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Ino Confesses to Naruto Chunin Exams Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Sarutobi Hiruzen's mind drew blanks. Nothingness, a dark abyss was his thoughts, and it was as though his brain had been replaced with the untarnished canvas of a great artisan waiting for the muses to grant him a revelation. His mind was like a large scab of stone, big, useful, but otherwise unattractive until the hammer and the chisel had been used to caress its form and therefore give it life. To turn the stone and carve it into something worth being considered a masterpiece that would be viewed upon by all who gazed it. The masterpiece which would be capable of inciting awe, beauty and wonder, as men would cast aside their garments in lieu of the sights that lay before them, and then genuflect down, their foreheads becoming intimate with the ground as they displayed their reverence. The reason for this sudden blank state of mind was none other than the resident, blonde-haired boy that was known to the Konohan populace as Uzumaki Naruto. Come again Naruto-kun, you invented a new jutsu, and you want to test it out on me, because you think I'm the only one who could handle it. When he had set out that morning, after his brief meeting with Yamanaka Inoichi, he had been expecting to find Uzumaki Naruto at the usual ramen stand or at his apartment, but rather, he had been directed instead to Training Ground 9. It was an odd sight, watching Naruto stand barefooted on the nearby stream, and performing different from of kinesthetic exercises on it, from jumping jacks to sit-ups, to vertical push-ups, clearly indicating that he had finally mastered the art of water walking and that he had done it to a T. Of course, what had made the sight odd and comical was how he had been muttering about women and girls throughout the process, and then practically debating with himself as to whether or not he should do something about something. Still, the Sandaime Hokage would not deny that he had not been expecting Naruto to have advanced so far in his training, and grasped the art of tree walking and water walking, before he had even yet to graduate the academy. Of course, the professor indirectly had a hand in this, as it seemed that Naruto had put the scroll he was given to good use, especially the chakra control training information that was embroiled amongst the mess. Still, to have mastered both tree walking and water walking in merely a month. That was heavily impressive, considering the vast pools of chakra Naruto had at his disposal. That same vast pool of chakra was what had made the boy believe that he had supposedly invented an entirely new ninjutsu technique. That's right, Gigi. The blonde boy was practically springing and bouncing on his heels, a wide, over-the-top grin on his face. Hiruzen merely let a resigned smile come unto his face. You know Naruto-kun, most people wait until they've graduated from the academy and started their shinobi careers before they start inventing jutsu. Naruto's lips moved into an annoyed pout. But the academy's boring, Gigi. It's just talk about a bunch of stuff no one really cares about. His eyes crinkled in mirth. Really now Naruto-kun? Naruto's expression didn't change. Iruka sensei once had us write a 30-page essay on the major exports and stuff of the land of tea. Naruto looked mortified. He made us write about tea, Gigi. Tea. I don't even drink tea, Dadbayo. Come on, Gigi. When will I ever need to know that the land of wind is dirt broke from importing fish and veggies, or the land of rain has got this weird leader that plays with lizards and poison, or the land of water has people fighting over who has the shiniest blood? Hiruzen didn't know whether to be impressed or baffled by the manner in which Naruto had just dismissed Hanzo the salamander and diminished the importance of the Kiri bloodline purges. You'll need to know all of it, Naruto-kun, if you want to be a good Hokage. Naruto opened his mouth to say something, before he frowned and begrudgingly let out a grumble. However, his eyes then immediately lit up once more. But Gigi, I can learn all about that stuff from the library, Dadbayo. It'll be easier than sitting in class for hours listening to it. Hiruzen's eyebrow rose, just a smidgen, as if to say, really? You in a library? Oi, I'm not that bad, Ibayo. And I was able to use the scrolls you gave me. I learned tree walking and water walking from it all on my own too. That was true, And Hiruzen would not deny the boy that accomplishment. Was it that Naruto was someone who learned things quicker and faster if he was left to his own devices? There was indeed the saying that a watched pot never boiled, and it could be that somehow, being in an environment with his peers who did not expect anything of him was somehow shunting his own learning capacity. So what you're saying, Naruto-kun, is that you think you can learn things better if it was just you and the material alone. He rubbed his chin with his index finger. Well, kinda. I mean, when I'm learning on my own, I don't have to hear everyone fawning over Sasuke Tem or hear people laughing at me whenever I don't get something right. Hiruzen slowly stroked his beard. People these days had actually forgotten that failing was supposed to be allowed. When you succeeded at something, you learned nothing new except how to repeat the results to gain the same success. When you failed at something, however, you learned what you did wrong, and discovered a new way of doing things as you pushed past the failure. Hiruzen knew that his successor, Namikaze Minato, for all the man's genius, he had failed over 400 times to successfully replicate and improve on Tobirama Sensei's Hiraishin, but of course, such things never entered the history books. Unfortunately, people had become afraid of failing, at failing even the most trivial of tasks like asking questions, not realizing that a fear of failure was hindering their own progress. He knew that Naruto skipped the academy a lot, quite so much in fact that it was considered a miracle he was even considered a student, but he needed to learn, and learning was a priority. Could he do what he had in mind? Well, of course he could. He was the Hokage, and he had the power and will to do so. Should he do it? There the question became slightly muddled, but he supposed that the long-term benefits would outweigh any possible disadvantages. Gigi. Alright Naruto-kun, how about we make a little wager? The boy perked up. Wager. I'll give you 1 week in the library, my library. It is yours to peruse however you so wish. By the end of the week, I'll give you the complete graduation exam to take. If you can score a perfect 100 on every paper, in every category, from world history to shuriken jutsu and ninjutsu, I'll allow you to skip the academy as much as you want, and still be eligible to graduate when the time comes. He was already leaping into the air. But, Hiruzen said, cutting off his celebration, on this exam, you have to make it a perfect score. There have only been 6 shinobi in Konoha's history to get a perfect score on every single category of the graduation exam, meaning this is not an easy task. Anything less than a perfect score is not acceptable. If you cannot do this, then you'll never skip a single class in the academy again, or else. He did not need to specify what exactly counted as the, or else. Still, Naruto seemed to be contemplating the offer heavily, and Hiruzen let out a small smile. Regardless of whether Naruto succeeded or failed the wager, it would still be the best outcome, as he would still end up learning the essential aspects of a shinobi. Hiruzen wasn't actually expecting Naruto to complete the task, but he would certainly try, and it would still work out in his favor. Of the 6 shinobi who had attained perfect scores, the likes of Hatake Kakashi, Uchiha Itachi, Orochimaru and Namikaze Minato came to mind, all of them considered the brightest geniuses of their generation. Naruto might have been rather observant when it came to certain things, but he sorely doubted he'd be able to cram the entire 6-year shinobi syllabus in just 7 days, whilst at the same time working on his shuriken jutsu, ninjutsu, taijutsu and other supplementary skills expected of a genin. Well, not unless he knew a certain forbidden technique, but there was no way an academy student had access to the shadow clone jutsu. You've got yourself a deal, Gigi. Part of him felt bad for the trickery, because he viewed it as simply a cunning way to make Naruto read more and train harder. Still, he supposed it would be a good learning experience for the boy. Alright Naruto-kun, I'll inform the gatekeepers at the Sarutobi clan to let you in and use my library. Now, what was this powerful new jutsu you wanted to show me? Naruto beamed. He, I've got a better idea, Gigi. I'm going to use this jutsu to take your hat. Hiruzen Sarutobi allowed himself a smile to grace his features, before promptly placing his hand on the legendary Hokage's cap. Oh, Is that a challenge, Naruto-kun? The boy cracked his fingers in front of him. Hell yeah. Amusing as it was, Hiruzen supposed he would entertain the boy. After all, it wasn't every day someone actually tried to steal an object from the most powerful shinobi in the entire village. At the same time, it wasn't like anybody tried. Alright, Naruto-kun, Hiruzen gestured his pipe out. If you can somehow take my hat in 1 minute, I'll grant you one favor. Hiruzen knew either his ninjutsu repertoire or wallet would suffer it, as Naruto would most likely drag them to the nearest ramen stand and buy an all-you-can-eat buffet, or ask him to teach him some new and awesome jutsu. He supposed he was allowed to spoil the boy, just a little. What he had not been expecting, however, was to blink as Naruto's eyes seemed to have a sudden clarity to them. One favor. Anything. Rarely had the Sandaime Hokage ever had to double-think his words, and on second thought, a favor from the man who was essentially the leader of the people, could be a rather huge boon. Of course, he was not going to back out of it now. Within reason, of course. Naruto was grinning wildly, wilder than he had seen the boy ever grin before. That hat is mine, TT Ibeo. Hiruzen blinked. Were Academy students allowed to move that fast? Within interest. Thank you for visiting Yamanaka Flowers, please come again. Ino sighed to herself as she watched the customer leave with a full bouquet in hand, the young man smiling vibrantly as it was obvious he was going to give them to someone special. No, not entirely obvious. Ino could simply tell, because of the way in which the man had eagerly yet unsurely strode into the shop, the way his eyes had roamed all over the flowers as he searched for the most beautiful ones, and the way he scratched his head and muttered under his breath over and over as to whether or not she would like this or like that. It hadn't taken her long to move over to the man and adeptly select the adequate mix and blend of roses that he had immediately smiled and possessed the expression on his face that said, "This is the one." She wished she had someone special who would give her flowers. She placed her hand on her chin over the counter, staring blankly at the passing people in the streets, her eyes wishing she would come upon a familiar lock of black hair, before her train of thought stopped, entirely unbidden. But, isn't that the same reason why you like Sasuke, Tem? She couldn't help the annoyance that ran through her form. Every time she even thought about Sasuke, any single second that he was brought up in her mind, those words would strike down the thought with the vengeance and brutality of a Jonin assassinating an academy student. It was made even annoying because she had been unable to find or meet the person who had uttered them to her, for over an entire month now, and she had all but given up on the search. Naruto was still alive, that much was certain, and he would be at the academy again. Choji claimed that he had seen him, so all she had to do was wait, and try and re-evaluate the reasons why she liked Sasuke while conjuring up random theories as to why Naruto asked her out on a whim. She liked Sasuke because he looked good. That couldn't be all right. Well, it was mostly because he was mysterious and dark and had a deep, dark and troubled past. She slammed her head into the counter and let out a groan. No, that couldn't be it either. That'd be saying that she only liked him because he was broken and she wanted to fix his brokenness. That'd also be saying that if he was a happy, perky and normal person without a tortured past, she'd have no interest in him at all, which just made her a horrible, horrible person. Her mind drew from the question of her crush and infatuation back to the knucklehead that had made her realize just how superficial it had been. She still pondered on what Shikamaru had told her, and tried to make some sense of whether or not Naruto really was observant, or not. Looking back, his grades had always been below mediocre, and he only ever tried once or twice. She could recall in class when Mizuki-sensei would ask Naruto a simple question like, "What is chakra?" and he would respond, "Chakra is the stuff that lets us do cool jutsu," and be berated. People would laugh and call him an idiot. Naruto would simply smile and scoff and then boisterously claim that when he was Hokage, no one would need to answer such questions. Of course, that'd just make people laugh at him even more, tell him to pipe down, and dismiss his declarations without a second thought. Wait, now that she thought about it, he had skipped class the following 3 days after that event. Then there was the time he had lost in a spar to Kiba. His academy-style taijutsu was filled with so many holes and openings that people had once again laughed and mocked it, whereas Kiba used his clan's taijutsu to beat him, and then claimed that Naruto couldn't become Hokage if he barely knew how to fight. He didn't show up in class for about 3 weeks after that day. Was it a pattern, or was her father's overly paranoid nature beginning to seep into her own mind? She groaned and let out a tired breath. Her gaze turned to the door. I wish the knucklehead would just barge in and save me the headache. Shaking her head, she turned around to organize the remaining few flowers in the display behind her, only to hear the bell ring. Welcome to, oh, it's just you forehead. Ino was somewhat surprised when she did not hear the resounding shout or denial or comeback that was associated with the banter between herself and her rival, Sakura. The pink-haired, green-eyed girl seemed unusually subdued, making Ino's brow rise. Now that she thought about it, what was Sakura doing here? Their rivalry over their affection of Sasuke had been one of the things that had torn a huge wedge in their friendship, and invariably ended up making them enemies. As far as she knew, Sakura had stopped branching by her house and seeing her outside of class. Hey Ino, are you alright? Ino's eyebrow furrowed. I'm perfectly fine. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, in which Sakura seemed to be contemplating saying something, but was holding back, and Ino was slowly finding it grating on her nerves. So you just came to the shop for the first time in almost 3 years just to ask me that? What gives Sakura? At this, the girl seemed to regard her warily. Ino, you still like Sasuke-kun, right? The Yamanaka heiress had her lips somewhat thinning as the question was brought up, especially considering the fact that she had been debating the issue herself. Where's this coming from? It was at that gesture that Sakura seemed to explode. You've not been yourself, Ino. For the past 1 month. You don't even look in Sasuke-kun's direction anymore or pay any attention to him. Whenever the girls are talking about him, you just go excuse yourself and leave. Then last week in class, you sat next to him the entire day, but you didn't even look at him once. That sounded like news to her. I sat next to Sasuke. Sakura looked appalled. You didn't even notice. No, she hadn't. Her thoughts had been apparently too preoccupied with other things, but how in the world had she managed to sit near him for an entire class without even turning in his direction? 2 months ago, if she sat next to the affection of her crush, she would be squealing and swooning and rubbing it in Sakura's face for the next 6 weeks at the very least. Now, it just seemed kind of pointless. Wait, just Sasuke. Not Sasuke-kun. Ino, what's going on? What's wrong with you? Nothing's wrong with me, Sakura. Sakura vehement in her denial. Something is wrong with you. You've been different ever since you lost that bet. You've been staring off into space, ignoring Sasuke-kun, and you've been stalking the baka of all people. You Ino. She was unable to help the splutter of incoherent words that came out of her mouth at the accusation. I'm not stalking Naruto. Well, she technically wasn't. Stalking would assume that she was following him around, and that would work solely on the assumption that she could find him. What she had been doing was going to his most known or recently frequented locations, and then waiting for hours upon end to see if he would show up there. Wait, that wasn't stalking, was it? Sakura seemed to heavily disagree, shaking her head back and forth. You've changed, Ino. There was a small part of her that felt incredibly annoyed in the manner that Sakura had made that utterance. It was that part of her that could not absolutely stand for it, the part of her that was peeved at the manner in which Sakura had implied that her change was for the worse, as though she was the one in error. And why do you care? Sakura took a step back. What do you mean? We're fry. Sakura had stopped that sentence, realizing what she was going to say. No, we're not friends. Ino said, her voice dropping. We're not friends, remember? We ended our friendship years ago when we both realized we liked the same guy who still hasn't noticed us over 3 years later, so we're not friends. A thick cosseting silence blanketed over them, and green orbs met violet, two eyes which had gone through the years, gazing at each other with companionship and closeness, drifted apart with jealousy, anger, rivalry, all over what? Ino found herself asking herself that question, now that she realized it. They had become rivals over what? They had sacrificed their friendship over what? Moments spent laughing in each other's company, grooming each other's hair, sharing everything they had, discussing fantasy weddings and magnificent white nights, envisioning themselves as princesses within each other's courts, caring, joking, smiling, all of it, sacrificed, replaced with vicious name-callings, arrogant remarks, violent outbursts and confrontations, for what? For Uchiha Bloody Sasuke. She had sacrificed the closest thing she had to a sister, for a boy's affection. How stupid was she? Ino, you didn't answer my question. You still like Sasuke-kun, right? She had taken one step forward. Right. Sakura's emerald eyes were almost glistening, searching, as though trying to convince herself of something, though Ino did not know what. What Yamanaka Ino did know, however, was certain. There are more important things in life than Uchiha Sasuke. Sakura recoiled, as though physically slapped. Her mouth opened, and then it closed, and then she shook her head. Sakura. The girl had not said a word as she departed from the store, and the door closed with a soft resounding click. Within interest. Cage versus Academy student. It was a matchup that wouldn't even be brought up as a joke, because the comedic value died quickly, similar to the Academy student dumb enough to challenge a being whose sheer power and experience trumped theirs in light years. Of course, when the goal was not to defeat said Cage, but merely to steal an object from the man within a short time frame, there was a chance of success, regardless of how utterly improbable it was. These chances of success were also aided by the fact that the Cage would not be attacking, but merely defending and staying in a stationary position. Still, despite these advantages, Sarutobi Hiruzen was rather interested in seeing just what his foster grandson was capable of, if he was sufficiently interested. He had been expecting many things, but no one could ever be prepared for Uzumaki Naruto. Thus, the minute of truth began. The boy had lunged forth from his place, moving at a speed that was most definitely not Academy student caliber, and Hiruzen's eyes narrowed as he noticed a large emission of brief smoke trailing from the boy's legs, which were propelling his movement. The smoke was white and traditional. In other words, it was the chakra smoke that was emitted whenever a technique such as the Bunshin, Henjer Kawarimi was performed, the same smoke which covered the Shunshin, and usually occurred as a result of a brief emission of excessive chakra being released into the atmosphere. The smoke was further common when releasing or unsealing objects from scrolls, or performing the summoning technique, and traditionally, the smoke went unnoticed or ignored by shinobi, having no real use except but to provide a brief cover to their movements. Naruto went above and beyond. Eat this Gigi. The charging boy placed his hands into the traditional seal for the henge, Kemurigakure no Jutsu. Hiding in the smoke technique. Naruto had not been joking when he said he had invented a new technique. The Hokage would have burst out laughing in amazement as his entire vision, and nay, the entire training ground immediately went up in an explosion of smoke. The white, all-consuming chakra smoke climbing higher and forming into the shape of a giant mushroom cloud, not that Sarutobi was aware of this as he placed his hand on his hat, to stop the billowing smoke from sending it flying as his clothes flapped vividly and he had to apply a bit of chakra to his feet to stop himself from being blown backwards. Hiruzen blinked, as he noticed that apparently not even Naruto knew the full potential of his jutsu, as the boy was flailing backwards and having difficulty stand amidst the raging pillars of smoke, despite him being the one creating the technique in the first place. Gah, I think I overdid it, Dadbeo. He was sent soaring into the air by his own technique, and Hiruzen couldn't help it as he burst out laughing, the aged Hokage laughing like he had not laughed in a long time. Issues of control and direction aside, Naruto's feat was still highly impressive, especially considering the fact that not even Namikaze Minato or Orochimaru had ever gone as far as using the vaguest, most obscure aspects of shinobi arts, and then turning it into an undeniably useful technique, and doing so while they were academy students. It was a truly impressive and noteworthy feat, and Hiruzen would have to rank the hiding in the smoke technique as a B rank supplementary ninjutsu, though, he had a feeling it would be A rank because the sheer chakra that was in the air was overwhelming, as though someone has just created 1,000 hefty shadow clones, which was the most chakra-extensive clone technique available. Naruto's vast pool of chakra was the only reason he could even create this much chakra smoke and still be standing. If anyone else were to try it, they'd just be exhausting their reserves. The smoke was not suffocating, however, but merely obscuring, which was why it was supplementary. If Naruto could somehow make the smoke act like actual smoke, that is, acrid and lethal to the lungs, it would be a deadly technique for any shinobi who wasn't a wind release ninjutsu specialist. After all, people who died in burning houses were more than often killed by the deprivation of oxygen caused by the smoke, than by the flames themselves. Still, Hiruzen also noticed that the smoke was evaporating fast, transforming into chakra in the atmosphere, which meant that it could not be used in prolonged encounter, but more or less used as a large diversion or smokescreen. Unless, of course, the enigmatic blonde could somehow make it last longer. His musings about the technique were cut short when Naruto had rapidly broken through the smoke cloud, his form possessing a wild vivid grin as his right hand was outstretched for Hiruzen's hat, reminding the Sandaime that he had given the boy a minute to see if he could get it. He had only 20 seconds left. Hiruzen effortlessly negated Naruto's attempt, using his smoking pipe to smack Naruto by the wrist, destabilizing the boy and sending him to the left. Naruto, to his credit, rolled with the momentum, performing an airborne cartwheel as his sandaled feet struck the ground for all of a brief second before he went in for another charge, this time with his left hand. Hiruzen's pipe came down once more, only to blink as Naruto grabbed onto the pipe-wielding hand, his eyes sparkling. "You're mine, Gigi." The Hokage realized that Naruto's grip was airtight, and rapidly came to the deduction that he was utilizing the basics of the tree-climbing technique to hold on tight, applying chakra to his palm to give it impeccable gripping quality. Of course, Sarutobi Hiruzen was called the professor for a reason, and what Naruto was doing was the basics of a long-forgotten, sticky fist taijutsu style which relied on strong grapples utilizing chakra as a base. It was a style that was hard to beat, if one did not know the counter. "Nice try, Naruto-kun." Chakra burst forth from the tenketsu around the area, rapidly destabilizing Naruto's own chakra that was holding him in place, leaving the boy's eyes widening. Hiruzen spun out of Naruto's hold, and literally spun the boy away from him, sending him airborne with nothing but a twist of his wrist. Naruto was sent spinning in the air like he was caught in a tornado, before he landed on his butt amidst the smoke. 15 seconds remained. "Gah, I thought I had you for certain, TT Ibeo. I haven't even practiced that move on anyone yet." Despite his words, Naruto did not look at all discouraged. Instead, he rose up, amidst the smoky carapace that was their surroundings, still with a grin on his face. "Guess I've got to show you my awesome secret technique." Naruto charged forward once more, legs propelling him towards the air as he made a fast grab for the Hiruzen's hat. The Sandaime sidestepped, instincts and years of experience belaying Naruto's moves easily, the airborne boy's swing easily going wide, as he was left easily exposed and Hiruzen bumped him on the head with his pipe, sending the boy once more plummeting to the ground. 12 seconds remained. Hiruzen's curiosity piqued as Naruto's feet never touched the ground. Mere millimeters away from when his blue sandal would make impact with the earth, his form was rapidly absorbed by the familiar cloud of chakra smoke. Somehow, he rapidly regained momentum, thrusting upwards with his left arm in a sharp lunge for Hiruzen's hat. The god of shinobi's reflexes acted in place for his momentarily surprised mind, and he dodged once more, effortlessly twirling away from Naruto's assault, the young boy's grabby hands once more swiping futilely into the smoke, before he descended into a pile of white smoke once more. 10 seconds remained. More smoke engulfed Naruto's form before he hit the ground again, and he was sent lunging towards Hiruzen at faster speeds than before, leaving the Hokage no other choice but to slip into a soft stance, one that would be eerily reminiscent to a casual observer as that of the Hyuga clan, as caught the boy by the wrist, and swung him to the side, sending him flying into the obscure hazy clouds. Only for Naruto to come barreling back at the Hokage at twice the speeds he was thrown, rapidly tossing a rubber chicken upwards in an attempt to knock off his hat. Hiruzen ducked beneath the wayward latex bird and had his eyes twinkling in amusement and rapid intrigue. 8 seconds remained. What Naruto was doing was the equivalent of dropping a kunai to the ground, and then mere seconds before the kunai made contact, it would veer off upwards in a diagonal angle, suddenly gaining momentum from Kami knows where. Essentially, Naruto had an infinite source of momentum and kinetic energy, each and every time he was engulfed in brief smoke. The true question was where or how Naruto was getting this limitless momentum from. Still, only 7 seconds remained, and it would be over. I've got you now, Gigi. 6 seconds. Naruto came charging once more from his left side, arms extended wide in a comical manner of a pouncing cat. 5. Hiruzen extended his palm towards the boy's ankle. 4. Only for his eyes to go wide as his hand slipped right through. A bunchen. 3. There was a brief gust of smoke, and Hiruzen froze as he gazed upwards, realizing his folly. 2. He was the rubber chicken. 1. Naruto was above him, grinning, and aged brown eyes met ocean blue, one holding great determination to completing his task, the other holding a hearty pride and amazement, as the boy's hands lunged downwards descending towards the Hokage's hat, his thumb, index and middle fingers managing to softly grip against the top of the headwear and lift it a centimeter off Hiruzen's head. 0. Futon. It was a nameless, generic wind technique that merely emitted wind-natured chakra in all directions, which was suitable enough to immediately dispel the Naruto's Kemurigakure no Jutsu, the gusts of wind vanishing the clouds of chakra smoke sending the boy soaring into the air, before eventually crashing into the ground in an undignified heap. The fields of training ground 9 were once again clear of smoke, and Naruto collapsed onto the ground, letting out a short burst of air as Hiruzen let out a soft breath, realizing that the time was up. He was uncertain if he was merely rusty from not having had any combat experience in over a decade, or if Naruto's sheer tenacity was great enough for him to have nearly succeeded in stealing his hat. That was not a bad attempt, Naruto-kun. Naruto stood. His back was turned, and he could not see the boy's expression, but he seemed to be shuddering in place, shaking, and Hiruzen frowned. Naruto. I did it. Yada. Hiruzen suddenly realized that he could feel a breeze on his scalp. The cheeky blonde boy standing in front of him placed the Hokage's hat firmly placed on his head, and a wild, energetic grin on his face, his eyes twinkling in a manner that uncontrollably sent goosebumps down Hiruzen's spine. I win, Gigi. How had he? Hiruzen's eyes widened. You applied the tree climbing technique to grab my hat. It was a statement, not a question. Of course, Naruto did not seem to care as he jumped and paraded across the training ground with the cap on his head, leaping and whooping, throwing all manner of flips and turns without care. Hiruzen let out a resigned breath as he watched the boy's antics. He placed his hand under his bearded chin and rubbed it slowly, trying to recall the events of the battle. He did not know how Naruto was limitlessly getting constant momentum from, which allowed the boy to rebound back faster than normal, and at the same time Naruto had hanged himself into a rubber chicken, and he had sent out normal bunchins in his place, except, if he had hanged himself, how had he thrown himself? The clone that had been attacking him was a basic traditional bunchin, not a solid one. Hiruzen shook his head. Of course, he had been holding back and not taking the boy seriously, but there were too many mysteries within that display, and as much as there was a part of him that wanted the answers, he decided that every shinobi was indeed entitled to their secrets. He also made a brief mental note to summon Enma, and find mate a guy. It seemed that the numerous years behind the desk had truly rusted his skills. Heavens forbid a foreign village or his former student decide to attack, his rustiness would immediately be the death of him. Or perhaps it was time to start looking into a new successor again. Regardless, until he found a successor, He was still the Hokage, the strongest shinobi in the village, which meant that it was time to shake his old bones and start ensuring he lived up to that title. His attention was brought back to the boy in front of him, still celebrating with his hat, and Hiruzen somewhat realized that Naruto just might be able to get a perfect score on the academy graduation exam if he put his mind to it. Rather than have him wait around after that exam, why not make the boy a genin immediately? Skill-wise, Naruto met and surpassed most of the requirements. Or at least, Hiruzen was quite certainly sure that no other person in history could claim to have accomplished the feat of stealing their Kage's hat from his head, as an academy student Kage holding back or no. Then there was the feat of actually inventing that Kemurigakure technique all on his own. There was no doubt in Hiruzen's mind, Naruto was definitely genin material. It seemed the genin core might be gaining an addition earlier than expected. Alright Naruto-kun, you grabbed my hat. The boy with the large oversized hat on his head turned to him, before giving a brilliant dazzling grin. Does that mean I get to ask a favor from you, Gigi? The Hokage smiled. Yes Naruto-kun, one favor, within reason. The boy's face seemed to rumple up into thought and contemplation, as he slowly, but certainly began rubbing at his cheeks. I want you to spend the rest of the weekend with me, Gigi. The Hokage blinked, momentary surprise entering his form, along with a wealth of disbelief. What? He breathed out, not trusting his own voice. Naruto grinned. That's my favor, Gigi. The only thing I really want from you is you. When I have that, why would I need anything else? Ibeo. Hiruzen's throat felt fairly dry. I see. It was often easy to forget how Naruto had grown up with no parents, and no family, and no one to so much as sit down and talk with. How so easy it was to forget. Gigi, is something wrong? Your eyes are getting all misty. It's just the smoke from your technique, Naruto-kun, nothing to worry about. Hiruzen rumpled the boy's hair. We'll get back to discussing how you came up with that technique in the first place, but now that I'm all yours for the weekend, what would you like to do first? Naruto's grin grew wide. How do you like your popcorn, Gigi, buttered or salted? Sakura wasn't talking to her. The heiress of the Yamanaka clan had spent the first half of her weekend attempting to find her rival, and only for the pink-haired girl to rebuff or shun her at every meeting. They'd met at the market, and Sakura turned the other way and acted as though she was in a brief hurry, and as though the person in front of her was an awkward stranger or an estranged lover, creating an air of social gracelessness as Ino had stood, like a scorned lover whose advances has just been publicly rejected. They'd met at the park, and Sakura's green eyes had hit her form as she moved with the crowd of nameless, Uchiha-worshipping BITC classmates, and the pink-haired girl's gaze would rapidly be averted, as though something more important had come into her field of vision, like the daimyo had suddenly strolled by on an elephant, and was offering to take pink-haired girls as his brides. Ino had tried her usual brands of teasing insults or comments, and nothing had worked, as Sakura had somehow become transcendent to the very barbs she would previously be quick to shoot down. She was perfectly content to pretend as though Ino did not exist, as though the girl she bantered with on a daily basis was a ghost and a wisp of air, unseen and unheard. In response, Ino had spent the next half of her weekend in an obsessed, infuriated frenzy, a work ethic and dedication that would have made certain spandex-wearing individuals completely enthralled, and then, mystified, then worried, and finally, outright terrified. Sleep. What was sleep? What had it mattered to her? Food. Excellent. It would be the fuel to keep her moving. Rest. A four-letter word that had been ripped out of the pages of her dictionary, crumpled into a ball, and used as tinder to light the flames that spurned her forward and maximized her passion. It had not been hard to sneak out of her room when her father believed her asleep, and head to the nearest training ground as her fists and kicks proceeded to turn the innocent dummies into splinters, hapless victims to her bubbling rage and frustration. So Sakura had decided not to talk to her. That was fine, perfectly fine. She wouldn't even let Ino explain herself or her reason, or even give the tiniest of ideas as to what was wrong, and Ino found it perfectly fine. It was perfectly fine. Ino, are you okay? The Yamanaka heiress drew from her musing as she entered the classroom. Monday morning had come too bright and far too early for her tastes. The birds at her windowsill sung in a manner that turned her brain to a deck of cards at the hands of a master shuffler. Her response had been to toss her comb with unerring accuracy until it smacked the creatures in the eye and told them that their musical performance was unwelcome. If that had not been enough, the sunlight pierced through her orbs as though a clan of divine giants had decided to attach a magnifying glass unto a torch powered by the collective chakra of 1,000 kage, and use said torch to blind little girls for fancy. A combination of her irritability and impatience did not detract her from the fact that there were indications of bangs under her eyes that her makeup kit had not been able to completely hide, and her hair possessed a brief frazzled intensity that would make it obvious that it had not been as meticulously treated as was the norm. Had Yamanaka Ino looked into the mirror, she would have set it ablaze and run screaming at the monstrosity that stood before her. Or, her reflection would have committed seppuku and saved both of them the misery. Do I look okay, Shikamaru? If this face was the last thing you saw at night, would you still be able to sleep? The boy beside her blinked, his visage clad in shock, his jaw slightly lowered, his eyes wide, as he blinked numerous times in rapid succession. I'm sorry, Shikamaru. I'm just a little tired, she said, letting out a brief sigh. You didn't get any sleep. He did not phrase it as a question. No. Lying to Shikamaru was an exercise in futility. Problem with the boy was that when he wasn't being his usual extremely lazy self, he was damn perceptive, extremely much so that any slight indication or inflection would tip him off. Why, I was busy murdering wooden dummies with her fists, and imagining them to be the form of a pink-haired acquaintance was rather time-consuming. Her eyes slowly strayed down to her fists, which were currently wrapped in bandages in the manner that taijutsu specialists did. Of course, the only reason for that was to hide the numerous bruises and cuts that were on the skin, which would have no doubt drawn attention from her father. Shikamaru's eyes trailed towards her hands, which made her clench them unconsciously. Then, he turned his gaze back into her eyes, and they stayed there for several seconds, as though searching for something. Judging, condemning, evaluating, analyzing, she could never exactly know what was running through the mind of the Nara when his gaze stopped resembling a sloth addicted to cough syrup. The gaze had stayed there for a few seconds, before, as always, the boy let out a drawled-out sigh. Troublesome. She rolled her eyes, in part to remove eye contact from Shikamaru, and in part as a response to the boy's usual remark. That's your reaction to everything. He shrugged, a lazy, half-hearted shrug in which his shoulders barely nudged upwards enough to be noticeable. It's because everything is. Everything is, she asked, her tone raising. Troublesome. Typical Shikamaru. You won't get far in life thinking like that, you know. I'll get far enough. She sighed, shaking her head. This back and forth exchange existed between them for a very long time, with her trying to get him to actually try for once, and him always refusing to budge. Ino paid no further heed to him, instead, turning her gaze to the door. She had arrived at school rather early after all, and other students were yet to arrive. Normally, she would have been watching the door in anticipation for a mop of shaggy blonde hair, but today, her interests lay elsewhere. Pink hair and green eyes entered into the class, chatting and chittering away with two fakers, friends, and her eyes managed to stray upwards, to the row of seats where Ino was. Saku. Again, her eyes flickered away as soon as their two orbs made contact. Ino was left, with her hands stretched out, her hopeful face slowly melting away, remnants of what was meant to be a beautiful meal, now an indescribable, black smudge. Ino bit the bottom part of her lip, her fists clenching and unclenching as she could feel the heat building up at the back of her throat. Why won't you talk to me? She wanted to yell it out, and she could feel the words die, stillborn at the back of her throat, forcing her to swallow the residues of saliva that coalesced in her mouth, pushing painfully down her esophagus. Then, as always, black hair and brooding gaze strode through the doors. Hearing Sakura squeal out had never sounded so foreign, so annoying, so aggravating to Ino's ears before. She could feel her teeth begin to mash against each other as her nails, routinely polished, dug into her skin slowly. With each and every passing second, the thumps of her heart began to grow louder and louder to her own ears. Her gaze zoomed in on the boy, who, as always, brushed aside Sakura, brushed aside her riv friend, as though she were a gnat not worthy of his attention for even a second. He regarded the insects he stepped on and the particles of dust in his path with more attention than he did her best friend. Sakura was her best friend. Yet, there the Uchiha went, not knowing, and not caring, about just what had conspired in the background in the name of gaining his attention. He sat, aloof as ever, unaware of just what had been lost and as to just what had been cost by the people who pined over his attention, waiting day after day for him to as much as look at them. Ino. Look at them, goddammit. Just look at them. Ino. Are you okay? Shikamaru called out her name, a trace of worry in the words that she did not pay heed to, as instead, she vibrated in her seat, and watched, as for the umpteenth time, the girls surrounded him and showered him with their wide-eyed affections and gifts, and all he ever did was to turn his face to the side, and let out that infuriating, exasperating HN. The class went silent as a palm smacked onto a desk loud enough to draw everyone's attention. Slowly, everyone's gaze turned onto the form of Yamanaka Ino, as a portion of her hair covered her eyes from being seen, and some would note that as they did see those eyes, they were grim, heavy, and radiating with a cold, inexplicable blizzard. Hey Goldilocks, what's up with yo? Her head snapped over to the class's resident delinquent figure, the Inuzuka boy, flinching backwards at the withering glare thrown his way, and the words he wanted to say died instantaneously in his throat. His puppy companion made small whining noises as it sunk itself further into Kiba's jacket, the boy himself wishing such was possible. She moved over from her seat, each step sounding louder and louder to everyone's ears, until she was in front of the desk of Uchiha Sasuke, the girls parting aside as a blanketing silence overcame all of them, as Sakura seemed to be looking at her again, but at this moment, Ino had a different target. She stood, gazing into the ebony eyes of the Uchiha, and for the first time in years, she could tell that Uchiha Sasuke was looking at her. She could not have been more pissed. Her entire form shivered, angry breaths came forth from her nostrils like she was a mythical beast of fire. Eventually, she roared, "Fight me!" Silence begot greater silence. Her words had been ground out, slowly, silently, but yet, in the mask of the great overwhelming silence in the class, she might as well have roared it over the top of her lungs. What? So he could speak. He could say something. He did notice their existence. Fight me. She dared him to refuse. Her eyes gazing straight into his orbs as she placed her hands on his table, even as she tried to control her breathing and did not so much as flinch as he gazed at her. 5 o'clock. Training ground 14. I'll be waiting. With those words, she turned around and walked back to her seat. Amidst the deeper silence, she took her place beside Shikamaru without saying a word. Breeing. All right. Settle down, you brats, and be quiet. Huh. You guys aren't noisy today. Yumino Iruka entered the class, scratching his head at the oddity, before shrugging. Well, I guess it must be a rare day. He had no idea. Uchiha Sasuke knew the meaning of hatred. He knew what it felt like for every atom in his being and for every firing muscle and every thought, to be consumed with white-hot flames, pulsing and screeching to be released and to completely engulf the target of his rage. He understood well the process that was involved in projecting that rage onto your target, to have it channel within you, to sing within your eardrums and push you to a point that not broke past all limitations. He knew hatred. He lived in it. He bathed in it. Every day he woke up and was greeted with silence, he was reminded of it. Every morning he walked into a living room that still stank of dried blood and screams, he was lavished with it. Hence, hatred was one of the few things he could sense. Detect. He had grown so accustomed to it, that he merely knew, when hatred was emitted in his general direction. In his usual manner, disregarding of those playing at shinobi without a goal, he walked out of the classroom upon the lunch bell ringing. Within seconds, the news of the confrontation was already on the lips of a third of the academy, and people pointed at him, with poorly shushed whispers and curious, uncertain gazes. Ignoring them proved to be more difficult than normal today, and his teeth clenched behind his lips, as he decided he was not going to be dealing with their pitiful brand of gossip whilst trying to get a meal. He strode away from the academy, moving onto the roads of Konoha as he decided to get his lunch elsewhere, his mind still focused slightly on the events of the morning. The girl, what was her name again? He furrowed his eyebrows slightly. He could not recall the name of the blonde-haired girl, as previously, she had merely been another face amongst the crowd of females who wished for his attention in one way or another. Yet, she was different. There was no denying those eyes, those orbs of hers which had stared him down unflinchingly. There had been true, pure hatred within them. Hatred, anger, and loathing, these were things that Sasuke believed himself intimately familiar with. However, he could not understand why her eyes possessed that much hatred for him. He set his gaze on a small food stand not far away, his mind still deep in some form of thought. He could not recall or think of anything he had done that would cause someone to look at him with such heavy eyes filled with hatred, to the point in which the person went as far to challenge him to a fight. Truly, the girl was not worth his time. The hate in her eyes was good, decent, enough that if she applied it with fervor to her training she would become strong, she would grow stronger at a magnificent rate. However, he did not have the time to humor her. His target was that man. His target was someone who had been Anbu captain at age 13. He could not afford to waste his time fighting people who were weaker than him, people to whom he would not grow any stronger from defeating, and people who could not even be considered as stepping stones in his path. His lips twisted into a scowl. Yet, at the same time, he couldn't refuse. He would not give those at the academy the illusion that he was somehow afraid of losing, or that he was somehow incapable of fighting against that girl. Instead, a crushing defeat would cement it in their minds once and for all that he was the best, the strongest shinobi in their entire generation, and that it would be unwise for anyone to even think otherwise. He came to a stop at the small restaurant. It did not necessarily matter what he ate at this point just as long as he had something in his stomach. He took a seat, ignoring the noise around him, as he met the face of the brown-haired waitress. "Hello, what can I get you?" He blinked. He had momentarily been lost in thought. He had not even checked the sign outside to confirm what food this place sold. "I want some. Yo Ayame Nichan. I'm back. Can I get the Naruto special, and make it double? I've got some hard training too." There was a momentary silence, as dull black eyes turned to face brilliant blue. "You." Sasuke grit his teeth. It was like the universe had decided that his day would be ruined by blondes. No, he was not going to deal with this right now. He stood up from his seat and turned around, only to let out a gurk, as he felt someone drag the back of shirt, forcing the front end to tighten at his neck. "Let go of me, Dobi. No way. Ayame-ne would kill me if I chased away a customer, even if it's Utem. That's none of my business, now let go of me. Not until you've bought a bowl of ramen tt Ibeo." What the hell was up with the idiot's grip? Sasuke knew there was no way he should have had that much power to be able to actually hold on to the back of his shirt with that much force, making him unable to leave. "I said, let go." A heavy echo of ripping cloth resounded throughout the small shop. He stumbled forward, free at last, only to turn around and spot the familiar blonde boy holding onto a large part of his black shirt, the part which had the brilliant white and red fan of the Uchiha clan on it. His back was now fully exposed, as his shirt was now more or less a tattered rag than it was any measure of cloth. Oops. It was official. Uchiha Sasuke hated blondes. "Dobi, what in the world were you thinking?" She cringed, the same question running through her mind at the moment. It was currently lunch period, and she had taken up her place beneath a tree, only to immediately find herself under the scrutiny of the one person in the class that she would have least expected. Choji. Yes, not Shikamaru, who sat across from her, his eyes still in their usual lazy demeanor. The person who was actually scrutinizing her decisions, asking her the hard-hitting questions and making her realize the error of her ways, was Choji. Well, I wasn't really thinking, she said meekly, which was somewhat understandable as Choji sat beside her, his normally round and cheerful face twisted into a narrow-eyed scowl. His bag of chips lay in his hands, but they were unopened. Really, Choji was a darling, but no one really understood how terrifying the boy could be when he was taking something seriously. Yes, Ino, you weren't thinking, he said, shaking his head and making her shrink further as she turned to Shikamaru and sent him her best, help me, look. The pineapple-haired Nara turned his gaze away, pretending as though he had not seen her at all. Traitor, she mouthed. He looked as though he was going to mouth something back, before shaking his head as though he realized it would consume far more energy than he was willing to give, and instead, he resorted to another lazy shrug. To her side, Choji sighed, his face looking far less intimidating as he began rubbing his cheek. Ino, you know you can't beat Sasuke in a spar, right? She was the type of person who usually did not like being told whether or not they could or couldn't do things. Come on, I have a chance. No, Shikamaru said, placing his input for the first time in the conversation, and turning both of their attentions towards him. Sasuke might be the most arrogant person in the entire class, but most of it is well deserved. He just might be the strongest academy student in Konoha, whereas, you occasionally struggle to defeat Sakura. Hey, don't use Sakura as a measuring stick, you make it sound like she's. Choji's gaze looked over to her. Ino, I don't like admitting it either, but Sakura really does have the lowest taijutsu and shuriken jutsu performance in our grade, and you, well. He sighed. You struggle to beat her. I don't see how you can go up against Sasuke and win. Ino found herself biting her lower lip. Maybe he won't show up. Shikamaru shook his head. His pride won't allow it. Failing to show up could send the wrong message that he was too scared of you to fight you rather than you not being worth his time, and he'd never allow it. She frowned. Then, what if I don't show up? Shikamaru and Choji glanced at her, and then glanced back at each other, silence resonating between the two boys before they turned back to her. It was at that moment that Ino realized the weird strength of the dynamic that was possessed by the two boys, in which they seemed to understand each other without so much as saying a single word. She was close to them, yes, that much was true, but a small part of her could not help but wish to have that same level of camaraderie that they had. To have that same level of companionship with someone. Choji was the one to begin. Ino, no one will easily forget the day you challenged Uchiha Sasuke to a spar and then chickened out. That much was true. She would not be able to carry her face held high ever again without being reminded of the moment, the day in which she had marched up to the seat of Uchiha Sasuke, frightening Inuzuka Kiba with a glare as her own gaze met with that of the Uchiha, and so brazenly challenged him. Warmth rapidly seeped into her face and cheeks as she recalled the entire thing. Kami, what in the world had she been thinking? That was a question that Choji also seemed interesting in discovering the answer to. Really, Ino, what were you thinking? I mean, you've never done anything like that. Ever. She bit her lip. I was just angry. And annoyed. And maybe the lack of sleep played a part, but. She groaned as she ran her hands through her hair. I just wanted Sasuke to look at them, at us, at any of us. To pay the girls who fawn over him at least some attention. Shikamaru and Choji remained silent. I mean, we can be annoying sometimes, and pushy, and thoughtless, but we do care about him. Sakura cares about him. Yet, I wonder if he even knows her name. Silence wafted amongst the three friends, the only audible sound being Choji's rummaging of a bag and crunching of chips, as their small group could still hear the buzzing and chatter amongst the students, because there were numerous mixed feelings about her challenge to Sasuke. Troublesome. Again, Shikamaru managed to convey her thoughts exactly in one word. Still, she looked over to the boy, and realized that he was even usually more invested in her life than usual. He was alert, listening, watching, his eyes weren't half-lidded, and his form and posture wasn't slouched and lazy. This was the most she had ever seen Shikamaru interested or focused at something. He caught her gaze, and his eyebrow rose. What? Nothing. I'm just surprised. Glad, I guess. I mean, you rarely ever pay attention to anything, so. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. If you get beat up by Sasuke, your dad would find out and he won't be happy. He'd complain about it to my dad, and my dad would mention it to my mum, and I'd be the one chewed out for standing by and letting it happen. Her left eye twitched. Of course, once a lazy bum, always a lazy bum. Just when I thought you cared. I do care. I don't want you to get beat up. She tilted her head. Really? If you get beat up, you'd be sore and grumpy, and considering I'm the one who seats next to you in class, that would be really troublesome. More irritation flowed through her form as her eye continued twitching, a tick mark appearing on her forehead. Shikamaru doesn't mean it, Ino. He really just doesn't want you to get hurt. Ino sighed. Leave it to Choji to abate her anger with a few choice words. Thanks guys, but you make it sound like I don't stand a chance against him, but I'm a lot better than I look. I have a plan. No. They both said at the exact same time, causing her to flinch back in surprise. Why, you didn't even listen to what it was. Ino, the last time you had a plan, it ended with you looking for Naruto all over Konoha, and getting angry that you couldn't find him. Her mouth opened, and then it closed with a dry clack. Trust me, this is totally different. It'll be different this time. For whatever reason, the two of them gave her looks that showed clear disbelief, and a little bit of apprehension. Still, Yamanaka Ino was certain that her plan would work. What was the worst thing that could? She stopped that train of thought immediately. There was no way she was going to jinx it. Nah, not a chance. She already had terrible odds enough, no need to stack fate on top of that. Yumino Iruka knew that what he was doing was wrong. There was a major risk to it, considering he was not an eccentric higher-tier jonin like Hatake Kakashi, who could simply smile off his transgressions through a masked facade and a lazy, asinine excuse. He knew it in his heart that it was wrong, doubly so given his post as a teacher of young corruptible minds, and he knew that his reputation could take a severe nosedive like a rare earth country eagle swooping down and snatching an unsuspecting lamb suckling at the of its mother. There was a very real risk involved, which of course included some of the rather more prudish kunoichi, who would henceforth regard him like a maggot that had emerged from the excreta of a worm upon discovering the nature of the act. His place in society would be condemned forever, and he would be unable to do as much as stare into the eyes of clerks when he bought his groceries without hearing hushed whispers and condemning judging looks. Regardless of all of this, he sat on the stall of the Konoha Academy's male staff bathroom, giggling away as his fingers gently turned aside another page, enjoying the feel of the paper, and ignoring the dribble of blood that emerged from his left nostril. It was a new Ika novel, and he'd be damned if he didn't read it. Kazama-san, you sly dog, grabbing Rashina-chan and Nikoto-chan. It was a guilty pleasure stretching slowly into the realms of a bubbling obsession with the book. He had begun reading the previous night, promising himself to only go about 30 pages before stopping and then getting some sleep so he could wake up bright and early and have more energy to shout at his usual brand of annoying brats. Of course, 30 minutes later and there was the sound of a rooster crowing as beads of sunlight burst through his window, only drawing his attention because of the manner in which they had landed on a particular, feisty paragraph in the book, and making the Chunin instructor realize his folly. He had been expecting it to be a horrible start to a day, but imagine his surprise on getting to class and meeting it quiet, completely removing the need for him to actually exert more energy shouting at the top of his voice in order to get the normally rambunctious brats listening to him. Not to mention the fact that they all seemed eager to learn. For once, all the students in the class were all at the edge of their seats, furiously scribbling and answering at his questions with the accuracy and speed of a master archer who had been blessed with an arrow creation Kekai Genkai. Everyone seemed eager and even impatient. As though they finally realized that they were not learning as much as they normally could be and wanted to absorb as much as possible in one day. Hell, even Sasuke answered questions in class. And Kiba was quiet all through. Iruka could only attribute this legendary stroke of fortune on his end to the gods of erotica finally granting him blessings for being a loyal and devout follower. Hence, he had decided to repay them by continuing to read their holy scriptures, which was of course delivered by their anointed one, the Toad Sanin of Konoha. It was lunch break for now, however, and he knew he only had a few minutes of reading, and as long as he was able to allow his fingers rub the sharp-edged pages and hardback spine, allow his nose take in a further decent whiff of the crispy smell of newly made paper, and allow his eyes to roam over the artistic masterpiece written in words, then he was suitably satisfied. The day seemed to be getting better by the second, and so far, nothing could ruin it. He froze, a shudder running down his spine as he stood up from the seat and closed the book. He peered out the stall, towards the windows, and paid close attention to any sound he could hear. Okay, that was close. For a second he believed he might have tempted fate and just invited some sort of great catastrophe upon himself by uttering those dreaded, often ironic words. Calm down, Iruka. You've just been reading too many novels lately. I mean, what are the odds that saying, "Nothing can ruin this day," would actually cause something ironic that would happen and prove my words wrong? This is real life. Still, he put the book in his pocket and opened the staff door, peeking to ensure that there were no hordes of angry kunoichi about to lynch him for reading erotica in the academy while he was on duty. Sighing, he closed it and turned around. Chunin Yumi no Iruka. Yumi no Iruka saw death. Yumi no Iruka saw death in the form of purple hair, and an unmistakable cat Anbu mask. He did not respond. Instead, he made a large, tiring sigh, before he slowly closed the book with a thick snap, and then he pocketed it. Calmly, he got onto his knees, and then bent his head lowly. My only request is that you make it quick and painless. He kneeled in that notion for several seconds, waiting constantly for the blade that would cleave his neck for his actions, only to blink in surprise when, after numerous seconds, it did not come. He flicked his head upwards back at the woman, the Anbu operative that was code-named Neko, and yet, despite not being able to see her face, he could tell that she was clearly amused by the entire display. Are you finished? He blinked, once, twice. Then, realization that the woman was not about to execute him for reading Ika Ika in the privacy of the male bathroom dawned upon him, and he leapt up to his feet, coughing awkwardly. Ah, of course, Anbu-san, I was just practicing for a recital, a play, or musical, about the honorable death of a samurai. Ha, ha. Maybe she really should kill him, if only for how pathetic that excuse had sounded. What you do in your free time is of little to no interest to me, Yumino-san, she said crisply, and you are clearly too timid to attempt corrupting a student, so I have no need for concern. Iruka winced at the timid. He honestly didn't know if he should feel relieved, flattered, or greatly insulted. I am here on the orders of Hokage-sama. Yamanaka Inoichi believes that someone could have been tampering with the students' records, scores and exams. Most particularly in case of bias against the student, Uzumaki Naruto. All at once, Iruka's form straightened, and he was instantly all business. Well, I know that some teachers may not particularly get along with him, but I don't think anyone would go as far as to. Unfortunately, what you think does not matter. What matters is that I have been given a task to accomplish, and you will aid me in accomplishing it. Iruka took a step back uncertainly. He knew that the Anbu weren't exactly the most friendly of individuals, considering the lives they lived, which included witnessing and committing gruesome acts of murder, assassinations, and sometimes, even genocides. Still, he felt that the woman was just a tad bit rude. Hokage-sama requested that I meet you, and stressed the importance of discretion in this task. You are to gather every test script, every record, every paper or document in relation to Uzumaki Naruto and his classmates, and you are to hand it over to me without drawing attention to yourself. She said in one quick, brisk and formal breath. Are you up to the task? Iruka's nose rumpled up. All at once, the reason as to why the woman had decided to ambush him in the male bathroom made much more sense. Still, he found himself confused, wondering why there was need for all the secrecy. It was just a couple of assignments and exam scripts, not documents detailing all the concubines possessed by the daimyo's wife. I don't get it, why all the mystery? Because this mission is technically classified. Iruka scowled. Classified. Classified. She repeated again, though with a noticeable strain in her voice. This is why I do not quite get along with shinobi in administrative positions. Years spent in an unchanging environment ultimately dulls your skills. Excuse me, what would happen if an Anbu operative were to walk into the academy and ask for a compiled scripts of students on orders from the Hokage? Amongst whom are 7 clan heirs to the most notable clans in Konoha, the Yamanaka, Nara, Akamichi, Inazuka, Hyuga, Aburame, and the last Uchiha. Iruka blinked. A reason for this would be demanded, and if the reason is given as an investigation, the question will be asked as to what is the purpose of the investigation, which will bring into the light the matter of a suspected bias of a teacher against a student, and therefore suggest the possibility of foul play in the administration of the Konoha Shinobi Academy. Iruka stared. What would you say if you were accused of elevating the clan heirs and giving them special attention over the rest of your students, allowing them to have better grades and scores? He immediately flared. That's preposterous. I would never do anything like that. I am aware of that, she stated. However, the civilian populace are not. In their perspective, if one teacher is capable of letting his own personal bias influence him enough to sabotage a student, who is to say, all of them aren't? He swallowed dryly. I hadn't thought about it. The Anbu shook her head. Of course you had not. It is not your job to consider the details and delicacies of the Konohan sociopolitical system. You're just a Chunin. Never in his entire life, in all his years, had Iruka ever felt his rank feel so inadequate. Now, I ask you again, are you up to the task? He did not trust himself to be able to speak, and instead, he merely tilted his head up and down. Good. After the classes are done for the day, I expect the files to be compiled and ready for collection. She had vanished in a swirl of leaves that left Iruka standing, in a daze, as he brought up his left hand, and he ran it through his hair. Just a Chunin. The 3 words pierced at him with a form of raging heat, and indescribable cold, as though someone had ran him through iceberg that was tipped with magma. Idly, his gaze flicked over to the Ika book on the ground, and then, he stared into his hand. The loud echo of the bell broke through the entire academy, and slowly, mechanically, a machine unhinged, a wound-up toy unleashed, Yumino Iruka turned around and walked out of the bathroom. A brand new, crisp clean, hardcover novel left abandoned to the pristine white floor. Oi Tem, people are staring at you. That's what happens when Adobe rips off a portion of your shirt and you have to walk back to your home shirtless. Hey, I did offer you my jacket Ibeo. His eyes flickered to the orange and blue monstrosity. No. Tuki Gigi offered you one of his oversized shirts. No. And Ayame Ne offered you an apron too. No. Honestly, all of those options were far worse than walking the way he was right now. He knew that lunchtime was almost over, and the journey back home would take a while, but it was worth it rather than going back to the academy the way he was. Your clan compound is way too far. It's almost like no one wanted you teams close to the village or something. Sasuke grit his teeth. Why are you even following me? 'Cause I feel kind of bad about ripping your shirt and stuff. He grunted. I don't need your apology. Just leave me alone. Oh come on Tem. I'm just trying to help you out. Sasuke rounded on him. I don't need any help. Especially not help from you. The Dobi was absolutely infuriating. Sasuke stared at him, With those wide-eyed blue eyes, those eyes that looked upon the world as though it was made of butterflies and roses, as though rainbows were rivers and it rained happiness and goodness. The Dobie's eyes were as bright and as clear as the sky, always looking free, limitless, open. Sasuke hated those eyes. It was one of the reasons he avoided the boy, avoided the Dobie. His was a disease, an infection of obfuscating stupidity and gullibility, a naive, open-hearted moron that would ultimately end up dying within his first 5 minutes of being a shinobi. Yet, Sasuke was sure that even if the Dobie were to be cut down by an enemy shinobi, he would be smiling in his final moments, as though he was happy, as though he was peaceful, as though he was satisfied. Oi Tem, you're shaking, are you okay? It's not that cold TT Ibeo. The Dobie had moved his hands towards him, to touch him, and Sasuke smacked it down with vehemence, the clap echoing loudly in the attention of everyone on the street to the both of them. Don't touch me. Hefty silence resonated. What the hell, Tem? Sasuke did not care for the attention, and he found himself gritting his teeth as he angrily stalked down the abandoned route to his clan compound. He paid no heed to the sun striking against his exposed back due to the tear. He paid no heed to the stares and hushed whispers, as he instead made way back to his house, back to the reminder. The reminder. That was all it was to him. A reminder. His very home was a reaffirmation of the fact that the Dobie was a fool. A very reassertion as to the fact that you couldn't trust anyone, trust anything, that the world was a place of comedic sick cruelty and unjustly hilarious jokes. Oi Tem, wait up. Sasuke mashed his teeth the hardest he could. The Dobie was still following him. Leave me the fuck alone, Dobie. He broke into a fast-paced dash, his top speed, becoming a bit of a blur to anyone not at least mid-genin level. His torn shirt made wild, air-slapping ripples against the wind. His feet left the ground in a succession so rapid, it was as though they were levitating. There, he thought, there was no way the Dobie will catch up to me now. Tem. He was blindsided, a blur, so rapid and so fast that Sasuke barely even had time to register the fact that it was coming in his direction. The next thing he knew, he was tackled. Instinct worked immediately, as he thrust his feet out in an offensive-defensive maneuver, kicking away his attacker and gaining some distance from him. Ultimately, both boys stood across from each other, and Sasuke grit his teeth as he found himself slightly panting, yet, across from him, the Dobie barely even looked winded. Oi Tem, what the hell is up with you TT Ibeo? Sasuke stared at him, stared at his eyes, those same eyes, showing him compassion, showing him care. Earlier, when he had not known the boy as well, Sasuke had assumed that it was all faked. He had assumed that the laughs were a facade, that the smiles were forced, that the happiness and cheer was all an act. Why? Except it wasn't. Why? It wasn't. Those eyes, those sentiments, all of it, all of it. Why are you so happy? The declaration had sprung forth in a manner that made his own voice unrecognizable to his own ears. The Dobie had also flinched back, clearly not expecting, not anticipating, the wild question. Sasuke found himself in the same shoes. He didn't understand it, didn't understand what had spurned forth that basic inner rage and anger inside him, didn't understand why it mattered. All that mattered was killing that man, nothing else mattered. Nothing else was supposed to matter. Except, they did. He had always thought of the Dobie as someone who could understand him, or someone who could at least relate with him. They both had similar, if slightly alternate circumstances. They both knew this, and though they had never mentioned it out loud, there was this understanding, this inherent conflict that had started as the very basics of their rivalry. Except, despite how much both of them truly understood the concept of loneliness, truly experienced the meaning of emptiness. The Dobie smiled his way through everything. Why? Because, the boy said, still smiling, still grinning, it beats the alternative. There was a relative amount of silence between the both of them. I get it, Tem. I get you, even though you try to be all cool and aloof and stuff. Not that I think you're cool or anything TT Ibeo, I mean, you're still a Tem, though you can be cool sometimes I guess, the Dobi ranted, leaving Sasuke just staring at him. Forget it. The last Uchiha put his hands into his pockets, as he moved to turn around. Not having family sucks, you know. The 6 words had made him freeze. When you get something right, you don't have anyone to celebrate with you. When you fail at something or fall, there's no one there to tell you that you'll get it next time or help you up. When you fall sick, you have to stagger your way out of bed and treat yourself 'cause there's no one there to nurse you. When you feel hungry, no one will help feed you. And when you have dreams, there's no one there to give you the confidence that you can achieve it. Sasuke's breath hitched slightly in his throat. He turned around, his eyes turning to the boy, as he noted, now, with a difference, those bright blue eyes had morphed, transformed even, to a shade a tad darker, a shade with far much more depth, a shade that seemed to analyze everything and anything, a shade that seemed to withhold no secrets, to disregard privacy and to break down walls in the name of sentiment. These eyes, they were so happy, so happy. It beats the alternative. And all at once, they weren't. Yeah, Sasuke said, his voice a bitter whisper. It sucks. There is a rush of movement, and then, Sasuke blinked, as in a blur, the Dobi was in front of him, hand out, and big, large smile. So Tem, Naruto said, grinning, let's be family. Silence. No. Ah, come on Tem. We were having a moment here TT Ibeo. Moment's over. Let's be family. Not a chance in hell. We could be brothers. I'd rather die. Strange as it was, Sasuke found himself bantering with the Dobi all the way until he reached his clan compound. However, there was still the lingering feeling at the back of his mind that he was forgetting something important. Ultimately, he decided it didn't matter, or rather, it was decided for him that it didn't matter, as he began his game to chase that surprisingly fast and nimble Dobi out of his clan compound. The sun wasn't yet up. Konohagakure no Sato was clouded over by the sweet afterglows of early morning fog. Dewdrops of water drooped, coruscating, and the soft cold air hung in abeyance. The sky was tinted a brief dark blue. The birds were drugged and the insects were mute. It was in this early tranquility, in which even the most fervent and steadfast of mothers would banish the thought of rousing from their depths of slumber, and the most eager of shop owners would assuage themselves that time was in their favor, that a brown-haired man worked. The training ground was desolate. One would easily be thought a madman, to have been found present there at the ungodly hour. Yet, this was the strange, peculiar case. A rhythm had begun with the sound of labored breaths, not the variety expected of more sensitive activities of the night. Oh no, rather, it was the sort that one would oft find coming from men who were fleeing from their lives, running, being chased, as though cheetahs had metamorphosed into demons from the beyond, and were hot on their tails. Grunts of exertion followed in the same manner. The sounds, echoing dryly into the night air that one would have been forgiven if they assumed a vengeful spirit had risen with the intent of haunting the location with all the subtlety of a scorned lover plotting a swift comeuppance. Beads of sweat mirrored dewdrops, falling in their own manner unto moist soil, mixing with the earth and forever marking it with the sense of human effort. The man in question allowed himself a brief sigh, a quick reprieve, before he rose, stretching his arms as far back as he could. It wasn't easy, he noted. It was not easy, not as easy as he had thought. That, perhaps, was the strangest paradox. He knew it was not easy, yet, he had calculated that the difficulty, no matter how vast, would still be surmountable. It was not easy to lift a horse onto your shoulder and toss it into a bath, yet, he had been prepared for the difficult task of lifting, of the weight, and of the determination required to painstakingly put one foot in front of the other as he approached his destination, and unleashed the equine into water. However, he had not been prepared for the creature to resist all the way through, to squirm to fight back, and to extend its rear and deliver hooved kicks into his skull. It had only been a day, and he knew there could be no immediate results. Still, he had expected, or at least anticipated, that he would have been able to lift the horse, and take his first step. Instead, He had barely been able to make the horse budge. The analogy of the horse was quite apt, he noted with a sigh. One filled with bitter merriment, the taste of acrid fruit and soured lactate staining his palates. Maybe if he were to utilize more analogies, his students would be more inclined to listen to him in class. Or perhaps, would that instead put them to sleep instead? Would they stare at him like he had grown two heads, the second of which was a cross between an aged monk and a pubescent teen? Perhaps, he thought, this was a bad idea. It was unlike him to get riled up so strongly. It was unlike him to grit his teeth and squeeze his fists and then declare that he was going to become stronger. It was unlike him to find himself completely discontent with his peaceful life as a teacher, imparting new knowledge to the cheerful students who wished to become legends in their own rights. The world needed teachers, it was a necessity. Teachers were the ones who built up foundations, who continued traditions, who passed down legacies and ensured that their students would survive, and most importantly, thrive. He had always wanted to be a teacher, and he had achieved that goal of becoming a teacher. Then came the next question. Now, what? He had never felt the need to ask himself that question before. He was perfectly content, perfectly fine with his post, his role, as an instructor to young, gentle, fragile minds and hearts of young innocent children. A task he would continue to do, until perhaps one day he would maybe open a larger academy and become a principal. Just a Chunin. Then, he remembered those words and his dream fell flat. His ambition became empty, shallow. He could not hate the woman, the Anbu, for he knew the type of lives they lived. He knew that they had seen horrors and committed unspeakable acts in order to ensure that people like him were able to live comfortable lives out of general risk. The statistics did not lie, as most shinobi in administrative positions tended to live, on average, at least 3 times longer than shinobi in the active field. Some of them even got to retire. Only 4 out of 10 shinobi actually lived long enough to see retirement, and of those 4, 3 of them were bound to have been in administrative positions. The man shook his head, staring at his sweat-drenched form, and he resisted the urge to laugh for doing something so ridiculous. That Anbu had lit a powerful spark within him, one which was burning even still, and the first thing he had thought of doing was to rush out and train, and then become a Jonin, just to disprove the woman out of spite. Except, he knew that he wasn't Jonin material. Jonin were the cream of the crop, the best the village had to offer. Most of them were either war heroes or experts in one specific art or another, and some of them had gone above and beyond to be considered S-class. In contrast, he was pitiful. Slightly above average chakra reserves, average hand seal speed, average genjutsu skills, average taijutsu skills, average ninjutsu skills, average everything. He was the very definition of what a Jonin was not. There was no magic he was going to use to suddenly find himself standing at the top with the likes of Hatake Kakashi and Maida Guy, and the question of course, was that did he even want to stand amongst them? He shook his head and sighed. It was a fun thought, entertaining the idea at the time, but of course, there was no way anything close to that would ever happen. Iruka-sensei. He blinked, his mind drawn from his musings as his eyes flickered over to a familiar blonde-haired form. It was a form that he had not seen for weeks, and a form that he had often queried the Hokage on, only to receive often vague confirmations about the boy's whereabouts and activities. Naruto. The boy's face scrunched up as he stared at him. You stink, Iruka-sensei. You really need a bath. Iruka's left eye could only twitch ever so lightly. He wanted to immediately raise his voice, demand questions, ask where the boy had been and what he had been doing, and chastise him for that being the first thing that had come out of his mouth after not seeing him for a long time. Instead, he said none of those things, and sighed. Sure. The boy blinked, his eyes immediately going wide. Huh. Iruka scratched the back of his head. I'll take a bath, Naruto. Heaven knows I need one, at least, before classes start for today anyway. The boy stared, before immediately going defensive. Oi, who the hell are you and what have you done with Iruka-sensei? He resisted the urge to allow his eye twitch. Very funny Naruto. Kai. This time, Iruka's eye did twitch, when he noticed the young blonde charge with his hand placed in the familiar seal for dispelling genjutsu. A double-layered illusion. That just proves that there's no way you're Iruka TT Ibeo. He pointed his finger at him accusingly. I'm not gonna lose to some imposter. Kai. Iruka's eye began twitching madly, as a slow tick mark was beginning to form. Huh. A triple-layered genjutsu. No way. Ka. Ouch. His famed fist of tough love was rendered upon the blonde's head, smacking him down as Iruka held the comically steaming fist up. Still think this is a genjutsu? Iruka watched, as Naruto turned over from his position on the ground, a large fulfilled smile on his face. Ah. There you are, Iruka-sensei. Hey, did you know that there's a guy going around hanged as UTT Ibeo? His eye continued twitching. Oh, yeah. Naruto sprang up to his feet in one motion. I mean, he looked like you and all, but he kinda got your face all wrong. My face, huh? Yup. The guy was all scowls and broody and kinda emo-ish, like Tem, but constipated. Iruka's tick mark returned in full measure. So I knew he couldn't be you. I mean, Iruka-sensei is the coolest, kindest, most awesomest teacher I know. Nothing ever gets him down. Iruka could not help the manner in which his annoyance deflated. Instead, he could only let out a smile and give a chuckle. Awesomest isn't a word, Naruto. Bah, what do those dictionary guys know about making up cool words? He smiled. I'm sure the lexicographers know a lot more about it than you might think. Naruto grinned, a wild, carefree grin. See, only Iruka-sensei would know about awesome words, or know that awesomest isn't a word, or know about mexicographers. Lexicographers. He corrected automatically. Naruto shook his head. See, you're cool, Iruka-sensei. Iruka could only let out a brief chuckle at his student. As flattered as I am, Naruto, I'm afraid most of what I know is general knowledge. There are Jonin who know much more than I do. Naruto pouted, putting his hands lazily behind his head. I don't see any Jonin spending 7 hours a day to teach us anything they know. Iruka blinked. Was it coincidence that Naruto's topic had strayed into an area that his mind had recently been contemplating? Of course it was. What else could it be? Still, Iruka engaged in his lecture tone. They can't, Naruto. Jonin are the elite shinobi of the village, and they are needed in the field, carrying out important missions in which they risk their lives and well-being for the good of the village. I know all that, TT Ibeo. Naruto whined. It's just, you know, they're this super awesome elite ninja type that everyone wants to be. You think they could spend a day out of their free time and stuff to just branch the academy and teach us something? Teach us anything? Iruka's mouth opened, and then it closed. There are reasons why I don't think that would be possible. Naruto quirked a disbelieving eyebrow. Well, he placed his hand on a chin. Once you graduate, you'll be assigned to a Jonin sensei, and they will handle your training. Doesn't that mean that teaching us stuff while we're still in the academy would kinda make their jobs easier for them in the long run? I mean, we'd already know each other and have a grasp for some of the more complex stuff and all. Iruka found that to be somewhat true. Most of what they could teach you would be rather advanced for people in your age and level, Naruto. Which would be way better, TT Ibeo. Naruto yelled, his hands going up into the air. I've been reading Gigi's books and there was some stuff in there about elemental natures, and how each person has a distinctive nature, and how it takes years to master them. Just think about how much cooler and stronger we would all be if we started learning at the academy. And what? Let impressionable young children gain access to giant fireballs, tsunamis and hurricanes. That would have been his response, except, well, it wasn't like that wasn't supposed to be the case anyway. Kind and caring he may be, but naive he was not. Would it not be better to let them have access to these powers early? To teach them the value of responsibility more firmly? What if a child accidentally shot a fireball at another child and caused grievous harm? On one hand, Both the assaulting party and the receiving party would learn a very valuable lesson about the potential danger inherent in the power and chakra they possessed, and on the other hand, once word got out to civilians, they might be wary of sending their children to a place where they could be grievously harmed or killed. Or, the children in question would be allured by the realization that there were people their age with that kind of power. All I'm saying, Iruka-sensei, Naruto began, scratching the back of his head, is that all we learn is what you guys teach us Ttibao. And if you taught us, well, if you really taught us, not just boring us to death with old stuff written in books or making us memorize stuff that we'll never really need. Naruto shrugged. We'd be awesome. The gears in Iruka's brain churned, as though it had been an old rusty engine which had recently been firmly cleaned and lubricated. The Konoha Shinobi Academy teaching syllabus had not changed too much since the era of the second Hokage. The only major difference had been the restriction of the graduating age, to allay fears of any more child geniuses going berserk from the pressures of the shinobi lifestyle, but that was it. They taught the same subjects, the same routines, implemented the same drills and the same practices. This routine of teaching had grown so monotonous that most of the teachers and students alike considered them a chore. They considered the Shinobi Academy a waste of time. Iruka could feel his heart thumping heavily in his chest. He could never be a Jonin. Sure, he could manage to make his way to special Jonin class, and then what? Where would his satisfaction be attained? From going on harder, more dangerous missions. From the better paycheck. From the sense of adventure. Money was not an issue. Danger was not his calling. Adventure was not his dream. Oh no, he would never be a Jonin. Instead, he was a teacher. What if he had been looking at it the wrong way? What if, instead of wanting to become more in the sense of accomplishment, did not mean a promotion? What if it meant, he became a better teacher? To teach, to implement knowledge and understanding and tactics, to have his students possess sharp wits, sharper skills, and the sharpest of minds and blades. So sharp, that upon graduation, their Jonin instructors would gaze upon their skills, mouth agape in astonishment, as the bewildered question escaped their lips. Who the hell taught you that? Their answers. Yumi no fucking Iruka, that's who. And when the lips of Jonin sang songs of a mysterious teacher who went above and beyond with their students, and said students went on to excel above and beyond, carrying the lessons of their mentors, of their sensei. He would not even need to find the woman who had scorned him, as she stared in confusion as to how a mere teacher was more respected than she. He would smile and say, "Of course you wouldn't understand. You're just an Anbu." Iruka let out an excited breath. "Thank you, Naruto." The blonde in question blinked owlishly. You're welcome, I guess, for whatever awesome cool stuff I did that you're thanking me for." He rubbed his hand through the blonde boy's hair, a deep smile on his face. "You helped me realize something. And, I think you may have helped a lot more people than you realize as well." Naruto grinned. Helping people is fun. Iruka's smile grew wilder. Yes, it is, Naruto. The image of a classroom full of rambunctious people filled his mind, and the image of these people smiling came right after. It really is. Yamanaka Ino knew that the end was near. It was one thing, to have challenged Uchiha Sasuke to a spar, and it was another thing, to realize that Sasuke had not shown up for said spar. The people at the academy had spun it in as many different ways as they could, in as many different stories or tales as their imaginations, primitive, wild or vivid, could go. Some had assumed that it simply meant Sasuke did not consider Ino worth his time, and as such, had dismissed the challenge. Others had claimed that Ino was actually going to use her Yamanaka abilities to mind rape the Uchiha into blissful oblivion, and as such, he was wise to avoid the fight. Some even went as far as to believe that Sasuke was afraid of her, because she was his mistress or something completely ridiculous. And just like that, she was immediately the most popular girl in school. This is torture. She groaned as she made her way to the academy, unable to not notice the stares, the whispers, the pointing fingers and hushed conversations. It's not that bad, Ino. Thankfully, she had at her sides the only two boys she could call her friends at the moment. To her left, Shikamaru walked. His eyes were like that of a tranquilized giraffe, staring vacantly at the path ahead without much care or attention to the rumor mill. Truly, Ino felt that the boy's level of apathy was slowly transcending mortal limits. In contrast, to her right, Choji was animatedly eating a bag of potato chips, and though he seemed quite as normal as usual, Ino could tell he was nervous. He bit at the chips 3 times before swallowing them, whereas she knew he could simply toss one into his mouth, and often did simply toss one into his mouth, chewing twice to savor the flavor before swallowing. She rubbed at her temples, not sure if she should be proud or creeped out at the fact that she had memorized her friend's eating habits enough to ascertain when something was wrong. I mean, all the girls look at you as though you're some sort of hero now. She let out another painstaking groan. Unfortunately, the consensus as to why Sasuke had not shown up had rang in favor of the theory that he was afraid of her. Now, there were tales going up as to how she was the second coming of Tsunade Senju, possessing a frightening fighting prowess that even the last Uchiha, a certified prodigy in his own right, was terrified of going against. It'll blow over soon enough, Shikamaru had said in his usual lazy drawl. These things usually do. It was true, in a sense. All she had to do was not add fire to any of the slowly increasing, utterly ridiculous flames that were the rumor mill, and soon enough, they'd see, and they'd come to realize, that there was absolutely no truth to any of it. The only, small benefit, was that the Uchiha Sasuke fan club had actually died. Ino herself could not explain how that worked. The majority of the girls who were usually chanting and celebrating about Sasuke had become incredibly subdued. The Ino Shika Cho trio took up their sitting positions as usual in the class, with Shikamaru's immediate impression of a drunken sloth, Choji's impression of an eager foodie, and Ino's, well, Ino. The scene which had awaited them had been that of Uchiha Sasuke entering into the classroom, either unknowing or uncaring of the whispers which made Ino sink further in her chair. Then, as always, he took a seat, placed his hands on the table, his chin on his hands, and he turned his gaze out the window. And then, the girls that fawned over him entered the class, the thickening silence slowly rising. And they all silently dragged their feet into the back seats, as far away from Uchiha Sasuke as possible. The end is nigh, Shikamaru. Mark my words. The end is nigh. You're not a prophet, Ino. It'd be really troublesome if you were. Ino watched, with slightly bated breath, for long pink hair to eventually arrive through the door, only to frown upon seeing long black hair and pale eyes instead. Said girl had entered the class, and then she immediately seemed to look flustered as the back row seats where she normally stayed was occupied, and the class was getting fuller and fuller by the second. The only few seats available were. Oh hell no. Ino watched with widened eyes as Hinata, the shyest girl in the class, moved toward the seat next to the last Uchiha, as she timidly asked him if it was taken. And of course, Sasuke did not respond. Hinata-chan. The girl flinched at the calling of her name, and all eyes once more turned to Ino. Shikamaru's eyes also opened at the call. Ino. What are you? Here, you can come have my seat. Aa Anyo IIC couldn't pp possibly. She marched down to the girl, grabbing her surprisingly soft hands and taking her back up to the higher seats. Move, Shikamaru. The lazy boy in question sighed. Troublesome. Just like that, the rumors escalated. Did you see that? Ino's totally kick-ass. The way she rescued Hinata-chan from that jerk. I told you girls that Ino was awesome. There's no way Sasuke would want to mess with her. Ino ground her teeth slowly against each other and firmly, vehemently, resisted the urge to slam her head against the table in the seat she was presently occupying. Dear Kami, could this day get any weirder? Then, just as she had uttered that prayer, that question to the gods, Yumino Iruka walked into the classroom. Silent, quiet, as though he were not supposed to be their teacher, and immediately, all the eyes strayed towards his direction and his odd behavior. Then, he brought up their thick, hardback, academy-issued manuscript. Sarutobi Asuma did not consider himself a ladies' man. This, he supposed, was an unfortunate side effect of his questionably roguish looks and appearance. He was built strong and hardy, and his finely developed beard was one thing that accentuated his appearance more firmly than anything else. Of course, the fact that his lips were almost often occupied with a familiar white stick, and his breath unfortunately stank of dry, acrid smoke could also be a major detractor. That was why, on this particular day, he had made sure to get the strongest breath mints he could find before he entered the Jonin's lounge. Recently back from a rather successful mission, wallet filled to the brim with suitable wealth and satisfaction, all that was missing from his life at this moment was a companion to which he could share all his victories and successes. Being a former member of the Fire Daimyo's own elite bodyguard squad, the 12 Guardians had often put him in many situations where he would find young and beautiful women, and where he would have to either protect or kill these young and beautiful women as the job required. Betting them, of course, had happened, once, or twice, but he knew, and they knew, that the act in and of itself had no real meaning, and it was merely two people attempting to release some steam from the rigid routines of their daily life, with the sweet caresses and touch of the opposite. A relationship was an impossibility, as he was a shinobi, and they were most certainly not. Hence, it made sense to him, as to find someone who he could possess a relationship with, someone who would not be squeamish as he regaled her with the grimy and unfortunate details of his job, someone who could understand and relate with said grimy and unfortunate details, and someone who overall could stand at his side if need be, facing off enemies in a valiant defense for their home and their loved ones. And he felt that he knew exactly just who that person was. Walking into the lounge, his breath was as fresh as newly plucked and squeezed mint leaves, his gait and back as straight as a kunai thrown by Kami himself, his chest puffed up, shoulders broadened, and the thick, wafting smell of cologne trailing around him like a wispy specter whispering encouraging words into his ears. Asuma was certain that nothing could go wrong. Until the sound of sweet, melodious laughter entered his ears, the laughter of none other than the very person he felt could be his destined soulmate. Wow, did she really? A small part of him grew irate, as he realized that there was someone there chatting her up, another Jonin most likely. It was to be expected, as she was a reasonably new Jonin, freshly promoted from her previous rank of special Jonin as her genjutsu skills had ultimately gained recognition, and her work in the field had marked her as exceptional above her peers. She was also beautiful, incredibly so, with an appearance that often left him a blithering mess, abandoning all forms of grace and finesse that his occupation had drilled into him, and leaving him able to do nothing but smile at her. He eventually walked forward, ready to see who could possibly be the one he would deem as his competition, the one who could possibly make her laugh as sweetly as she did. His eyes were not ready for the orange, nor the green, nor the spandex, nor the bowl cut. Ah, Asuma-san, how youthful of you to join us. Nor was he ready for the yelling. No one was ever ready for the yelling. His lips crinkled into a grimaced smile. Guy, nice to see you too. Barring the exception of his father, the Hokage, and perhaps, the copy ninja, Kakashi, Maida Guy was the strongest shinobi presently within the walls of Konoha. Asuma could not hate the man, because he had accomplished a great deal of feats, and he was a true and trusted ally of the village, who would sooner kill himself than betray it, and he would be just as willing to give his life in defense of it. Still, his eyes trailed over to her form, the woman who often had him turning in his bed for many a nights, whose chilling red eyes could stun him to stupor, whose laughter could make him melt and float and burn all in one instance. Yuahi Kurenai stood, actually happy to be in the man's presence. There was nothing inherently wrong with Guy, of course. He was a good shinobi, a strong shinobi, a loyal friend, an honorable man, a great man even. However, he was flashy, visible, boisterous and extremely eccentric. Surely Kurenai had no interest in him, right? Right. Kurenai-san, great to see you as well. Likewise Sarutobi-san. He inwardly grimaced. Please, call me Asuma. Anything but Sarutobi-san. The name Sarutobi was the name of his clan and the name of his father, and it was not his name. Not his legacy. He wanted as little to be connected to it as humanly possible. Guy-san was just telling me about some of the exploits of the sole female student on his genin team. Asuma rose an eyebrow at that. Really? Idly, the guardian shinobi wondered if it was possible for Guy to have gotten even more enthusiastic. Of course. Young Tenten is a vibrant and budding flower amongst the large field that is youth. Could this man create a sentence that did not have that damned word in it? Still, Asuma could not help his lips twitching into a slight chuckle. There was no mistaking the emotion that was clear in Guy's eyes, the sheer unbridled pride which permeated from his form like the thick musk of scented candles. Tenten not only graduated as the kunoichi of the year, she was so far ahead of her female peers, that had it not been for Sandaime Sama's law about the graduating age, she would have graduated the academy much sooner. Kurenai's eyes were sparkling at this point. Oh, crap, this was not particularly good. Kurenai was the type of woman who enjoyed hearing about other successful kunoichi, particularly if they were still young and budding. If Guy went on further about his student, Kurenai might be interested in seeing her, and if she got to see Guy's student on a regular basis, it meant that she got to see Guy on a regular basis, and if one thing led to another. Oh, Guy-san, Kurenai said, now clad in iconic green latex, smiling and winking, please show me your power of youth. No, 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 no. Get a grip, man. What was he thinking? This was Guy he was thinking about. This was Kurenai. Come on. And even if she did, somehow, end up dating someone else, sure, it would suck, and it may leave a vacuum in his chest, but it wasn't like he owned her, or could make her decisions for her. So why was he so goddamn paranoid about losing something that didn't even belong to him? He coughed awkwardly. You know, I was thinking of taking on a team as well from the next graduating set. Kurenai and Guy turned to him at the same time. Really? No, not really. He was not exactly the best type of person cut out for teaching, because he enjoyed a simple and sweet lifestyle. Sure, he had gained a few students here and there and taught them, but that was entirely different from having a genin team. Hell, he couldn't even imagine himself sitting down a bunch of troublesome brats and constantly being responsible for their lives and ensuring that they didn't go out there to get themselves killed. Of course, he couldn't say that now, could he? Kurenai was looking straight at him. Of course, he said, the words escaping his lips as though it were not the furthest thing from the truth. There's something about children, the amount of potential they have in them. They can do great things, greater things than we can imagine, if only we let them, teach them, and help them. Her eyes softened, and in his mind, a mini version of himself did a small victory dance. Yosh, your words ring so true, Asuma-san. I should have known that a man directly related to the Sandaime would be truly so honorable. He mashed his teeth together, forcing it into a smile. There it was again. Always, everywhere, every time, every single bloody time. A man directly related to the Sandaime. 27 years. 27 full years of living, and it still happened. Genin at 9. Chunin at 12. Jonin at 16. Black market bounty of 35 million ryo. 150 rank missions completed. 18 rank missions successful. None of that mattered when your father was the bloody, damned god of shinobi. Or worse, all of it was expected. Damn, he needed a smoke. The reprimand he would get for smoking the familiar white stick from Kurenai would be far more preferable than the surly repercussions continuing the conversation in his slightly irritable mood. As expected, Kurenai's nose wrinkled when she saw his slim white companion. Those things will kill you, you know. He laughed even as he whipped out his lighter. Kurenai-san, if I'm killed by these, I'm one of the lucky ones. It would mean that he had lived long enough for the smoke to do significant damage, and that alone, was of course, a rather grim fact. She realized it too, and her face immediately went slightly grim. Smooth Asuma. Real smooth. Way to kill a mood. Ah, now that the youthful Asuma-san brought up the issue of children, He rose an eyebrow as he realized that Guy seemed slightly less solemn, and then he turned his attention to Kurenai. I will confess, Kurenai-san, the reason I started up a conversation with you today was not entirely random. It has to do with a rather serious matter. Asuma choked on his cigarette. No way, Guy was Guy about to ask Kurenai out? The issue of children. Did he want to have? It seemed that he was not the only one with that thought in mind, as Kurenai's eyes widened, her eyes flicking over to him slightly. Oh, and what exactly is the reason? Guy slowly let out a hefty, but still hearty, sigh. I am afraid that I do not quite understand the workings of a maiden's mind, let alone her heart, and alas, I wish to make my proposal to you. No, this was not happening. Asuma stared at his cigarette as though it were a completely foreign object, questioning if the nicotine within had been replaced with some foreign substance that was responsible for this unbelievable scene. However, the one consolation was that Kurenai looked unusually distressed. Could it be? Yes. She didn't like him. And now that Asuma thought about it, that was kind of sad for the big guy, but that was so much better for him. Actually, Guy-san, Kurenai said, cutting him off before he uttered another word and also clearing her throat, I just remembered that Asuma and I have not been entirely honest with you either. You haven't. We haven't. A heeled foot slammed on his pinky. I mean, Asuma said, wincing, yes, we haven't. Sarutobi Asuma was not a religious person, but even he could not help but feel that this was the work of some sort of god, pleasantly interfering in his life for once. Kurenai's eyes flickered over to him, and it didn't take long for him to interpret and act. His arm slid over her shoulder. Kurenai and I have been together for some time now. At her smile and nod, Sarutobi Asuma knew without a shadow of a doubt. There is a god. Yosh. That is wonderful. Two sets of confused eyes stared in unison. Huh. Come again. Asuma had not realized that it was possible for Guy to be even more enthusiastic than normal. It is absolutely amazing. Asuma-san. Kurenai-san. May your blossoming love flourish into something of legend. Wait, wasn't he supposed to be disappointed? You, Asuma tested the word, you're not mad. Guy blinked in confusion. I do not understand. Why would I be? Your proposal. Ah, yes. I was going to request that Kurenai-san aid me in assisting my student Tenten. She has been, Guy frowned, slightly under the weather lately, and she refuses to explain what the matter is. As she is adopted by her sole father and is lacking in a key feminine parental figure in her life, I was hoping that Kurenai-san could step in and shed some light, or perhaps assist her with her issues. Oh, so when you mentioned children, Kurenai began. I was referring to my student, yes. And when you said you did not understand the workings of a maiden's mind or heart, Asuma continued. I was still referring to my student, he clarified, before his eyes lit up once more. Oh, but this is such great news. Two wonderful friends of mine are together and bound by the most youthful force of all. Ha. Yeah, we're together all right. Wait, why was Kurenai glaring at him? Wasn't this also partly her idea? Ah, that reminds me, Kurenai-san, about my request. Of course, I'd be absolutely happy to help your student. Guy beamed. Wonderful. Then, he smiled. Ah, as Sandaime-sama has contracted me to engage with him in a series of spars in an attempt to rekindle his flames of youth, I must be off. But Asuma-san, Kurenai-san, I am certain your father and all our friends would be pleased to hear about your relationship. Kurenai's eyes widened. Wait, Guy-san, Yosh. The power of youth burns strong. And the man was gone in a soundless, silent, and utterly professional shunshin. And it was at that moment, Sarutobi Asuma began sweating bullets. So, we're together now. If looks could kill, Asuma was certain that he'd be a dead man. Azuki Yugao had far more important things to do than this. Oi, Anbu-san. Come on Anbu-san, please. 1. Amidst the list of important things she needed to handle, was the completion of her mission assigned to her by the Hokage himself. It was a folly, she realized, to have, even for a second, delegated authority to someone else in aiding her to complete the mission. Yumino did not show up at the required time to hand her the important documents, an error to which she realized was caused by her own oversight as to the level of competence possessed by the scar-nosed man. Aannbu saw on. Yugao ignored the urge to grit her teeth. Rather than completing her mission, here she was, stuck in the Hokage's office with the primary cause of the mission she very wished she could complete. Leaving things uncompleted was for the lazy and the incapable, the procrastinators and dreamers, the foolish idealists who were more enamored with the idea of doing things than they were with the actions themselves. She was a doer. She got things done. Efficiency was a primary watchword. Her career and life was centered firmly around an organized schedule of optimal actions which were to be conducted at optimal times for maximum results. It's just one jutsu tt ibeo. Perhaps the boy would realize that it would be a waste of his time to continue to pester her on ninjutsu knowledge. Somehow, he had known that she was present in the room, despite it being seemingly empty after the Hokage's departure with her colleagues for a hidden training ground which could only be used by the military ruler of Konohagakure no Sato. The greatest taijutsu expert in the village and the strongest, long-lived Hokage in Konoha were going to engage in a full-out duel. Rather than being there to observe and learn, to improve the mediocrity of her own skill in the might of titans, she was here. Gigi would never know. Babysitting. To call it mere babysitting, however, would be a slight oversight. Instead, she chose to view her actions as important, as she was protecting the Hokage's office and the doubtless, numerous important documents and secrets which were kept within them. Her gaze through her mask flickered down to the boy in the room, who was bouncing up and down excitedly around her. A part of her questioned why the Sandaime would ever do such a thing as granting full access to his office library to the boy, to visit and peruse as he so desired. Another small part of her would not deny the spark of envy that came with the realization that this boy was essentially being mentored by the professor, the god of shinobi himself, albeit indirectly, and he may not even realize it. She ruthlessly crushed that part of her with all the might of a Sannin slaying a naive academy student. It was not her place to decide what or who the Hokage chose to impart his wisdom to, and perhaps, as far as she knew, the young boy might actually be capable or worthy of his knowledge. Aanbu san. Perhaps. The boy let out a long sigh. Oi, Anbu-san, if you won't teach me a cool clone jutsu, could you at least teach me how to dispel genjutsu and stuff? Her gaze lowered by slight fractions. Thankfully, her mask was still in place, so he could not see her left eyebrow slightly ascend. Yet, despite standing at attention, her body never moving nor making any slightest indication as to the change of her willingness to either listen or aid him in any manner, he somehow knew she was intrigued. Oh, yeah, that's right, you wouldn't know. He grinned. I made an awesome deal with Gigi about mastering the entire academy syllabus in 1 week and acing the graduation exams. Once I've done that, he'll let me become a genin tt ibeo. Impossible. The word had escaped her mouth out of pure reflex. It was an incredible failing, considering her status as a distinguished member of the Anbu Corps, known and renowned for impeccable emotional control. However, she could not help it. The boy in question merely blinked at her. Her opinion, she knew, could not supersede that of the Hokage's, yet, she inwardly debated on whether or not it was the wisest thing to do to state it. Though the Sandaime may deny it, or perhaps, refute it, there was a clear bond between him and the young boy, Uzumaki Naruto. The last thing she needed was a reprimand from her superior officer. What do you mean by impossible? She decided there was no need to continue. Her initial utterance had been instinct, a slip of tongue, a rare moment of embarrassing lack of professionalism caused by the inherent surprise and frank, sheer ludicrousness of the boy's claims. Oi, there's no way I'm gonna let you just clam back up after that. Her amusement was mostly internalized. What exactly did the boy think or believe he could do to her that would make her speak? TCH. Did the boy actually click his tongue at her? Oi, Anbu-san, just cause you don't think you can do something, doesn't mean you should place that limitation on other people. TTEBAO. Excuse me, was he baiting her? Was that a comment made purely to incite a negative reaction? Because if it was, Yugao would applaud the stroke of genius at the boy finding just the exact right buttons to push, and then she would promptly concede to her Anbu training, stifling her emotional response in turn and not deeming him worthy of a rebuttal. However, it wasn't. She could tell, from his eyes, his posture, the manner in which he had said it, the stress and articulation. Those words had not been uttered as fighting words. They had been uttered as facts. To believe, she began, for even a second, that you could master the entire academy syllabus in 1 week is the height of either arrogance or ignorance. Oi, such a belief is both an insult to the entire Konoha Academy, and every student who required years to pass through its halls and become distinguished shinobi of the village. You are essentially dismissing their struggles, growth and achievements there as a complete waste of time and energy. But, he frowned, isn't it? She scoffed. And what? You think you are better than them? Than everyone else? He was grinning. Grinning like a loon, the fool. I know I am Ttebao. I'm going to become the strongest Hokage that ever lived. Yugao merely shook her head. What in the world did the Sandaime see in this boy exactly? Arrogance and stupidity make for a rather dangerous combo. The boy held up his right palm, all 5 fingers outstretched. 5 days. There was a glint in his eyes, one that wasn't there before, she noted. A spark, like a tiny firefly, had been placed into round, cerulean lanterns. Depth filled those orbs with a sense of severity that Yugao was not certain she had ever seen from accomplished Anbu commanders, let alone upstart academy students. In 5 days, Anbu-san, I'm gonna make you eat those words. She watched him, as he grabbed a handful of scrolls, books and parchments that had been scattered around, all the Sandaime's notes, and then, he headed towards the door, his right hand still raised. 5 days Datbao. The door to the Hokage's office closed with a soft click. The resounding silence made the professional woman let out a brief, slightly irritated breath. Her head shook. This was no time for her to be contemplating the inner workings of a child's delusions of grandeur. She had a job to complete, and a Chunin to question about the nature of a particularly mouthy student. Uzumaki Naruto. Somehow, there was a nagging sensation at the back of her mind that she would be hearing that name a lot more often than she would like. Sarutobi Hiruzen was annoyed. Powerful explosions rocked a desolate training ground. Earth shattered and was sent uprooted into the sky as though the very foundations of soil had been replaced with gunpowder and dynamite. Sonic booms echoed repeatedly, like chaotic claps of clamoring giant. In a blur of speed, the aged Hokage appeared on a treetop, fully garbed in his combat form, scuffled, battered, and clearly exhausted. Yet, despite this, he found his left eye twitching heavily in annoyance as he heaved a giant staff in his hand over his shoulder, and a stream of words came pouring into his right ear. Clearly the stupidest thing you have ever done, Hiruzen. Even counting the time with Daimyo Hakamura's 4 daughters. Telling Maida Guy to not hold back. Do you possess a death wish? Are you impatient for the Shinigami's blade, Hiruzen? The Sandaime Hokage continued to let his left eye twitch. Enma Dono. Perhaps I underestimated Gai-kun's zeal. Underestimated? The voice was baffled. Did you not see the fire burning in his eyes as he declared he would beat the youth back into your body? I had assumed he was speaking metaphorically. Yosh. The echo of a loud battle cry was the only warning both individuals received as Hiruzen leapt backwards, not a second too soon, as the tree that had owned the branch he was standing on, faced a brutal execution by a green blur. The tree was uprooted from the ground with a sickening crack that could only have resounded from the force of a kick, and it was then immediately sent as a missile towards the airborne cage. Twirling the adamantium staff in his hands in the manner of fan blades, Hiruzen smashed the tree into millions of unrecognizable splinters, before creating a one-handed sign that sent a nameless generic wind technique rushing towards the splinters and transforming them into razor-sharp weapons soaring through the air towards their target. Amazing. Hokage-sama, your adaptability is a feature of pure youth. I will respond in kind most earnestly. The green-clad man launched forward, a powerful fist slamming into the air, creating enough pressure to completely disperse the storm of splinters. Enma grumbled. Is there anything this man cannot do with his fists? There was no time for Hiruzen to respond, as Guy appeared in front of him in a blur of movement, and his hands had already began moving in anticipation. Every punch that Guy threw possessed the same force as a cannonball launching at Mach speeds. Every block that Hiruzen made successfully with his staff had the side effect of rattling and cracking his bones, skidding him backward with every successive hit. The Hokage found himself entirely on the defensive in the midst of the fierce assault, as his speed was outmatched, his strength was outmatched, his reaction time was utterly outmatched. Only instinct, pure, unadulterated instinct born from years and years of combat experience. It was all he could rely on. Only instinct enabled him to block every incoming punch, to time every fiery kick, to account for every feint and every surprise maneuver. Still, instinct alone was not enough. A kick finally connected with his stomach, the aged Hokage's eyes going wide as spittle and blood flew from his mouth. He folded in half like a chair from the impact, even as he felt the sandaled leg shatter his armor-like tissue, certainly crack a rib or two, and sent him soaring backwards like a hapless old man. Hiruzen, Hokage-sama. The staff in his hands transformed into the form of the Monkey King, as Enma was able to stop their momentum and shield the cage before they crashed into, and through a series of trees. Hiruzen felt his entire world spinning, as dizziness and fatigue crashed into him all at once. His bones felt as though they were on fire and his legs were numb as though he had been struck by concurrent lightning techniques. Belatedly, he supposed it was indeed a bad idea to have insisted that Konoha's foremost taijutsu specialist not hold back against him in their spar. Yet, despite his age, Hiruzen possessed his pride. He had his pride as the Hokage, as the man who was supposed to be the guardian of the people of Konoha. Telling Guy to have gone easy on him would be an insult not only to himself, but to Guy and to the people of Konoha in its entirety. Still, he had not expected such a one-sided battle. Age has most certainly not been kind to you, Hiruzen. Most would have taken offense to the comment, yet, Hiruzen knew his partner, he knew Enma, and he knew that the Monkey King was a being to tell it as it was, and he could detect the trace of melancholy in the creature's words. Hiruzen, for his part, laughed, however little he could without hurting his damaged ribs, as he lay on the ground and gazed up into the large blue skies above him. I suppose it has not. Perhaps, it was a folly of him to have clung on to this post for far too long. Perhaps, he supposed, it was time to storm mourning his successor. Eagle. Boar. 2 brief bursts of smoke accompanied the arrival of the Anbu agents. Send a messenger bird to Jiraiya, and Tsunade. Mizuki was not a content man. He did not feel any true satisfaction from slaving away for the children in the academy, the ungrateful bunch, to whom he hoped, and prayed, that they would get brutally slaughtered on their very first missions. Some of them perhaps, like the Uchiha boy, showed promise, tremendous promise, and those rare talents that were actually capable of becoming deadly shinobi, he cultivated and promoted. The rest, however, were an amalgamation of welcome mats and dusty staircases in which their more talented colleagues would eventually step on and climb in their ascent to greatness. The Academy's syllabus was a joke, the type of joke that could be found in a 50-ryo book on the clearance pile in a discarded gift shop. Either the Hokage had grown senile from his numerous years in office, or it was all a deliberate ploy by some higher powers to cripple the development of Konoha by methodically severing the roots. He snorted, shaking his head as he enjoyed his cup of coffee. Lunch break was not the time to begin contemplating possible conspiracy theories. For now, he would enjoy the relative safety and paycheck offered to him as a member of the teaching staff. Less than what he would get if he was in the field, but the lack of life-threatening situations was a suitable trade-off. It also helped that the thing had long since stopped attending the academy. With such horrible attendance rates, there was no doubt in Mizuki's mind that it would never graduate, much less wear the proud headband of the village and perform missions in her honor. Hence, for the first time in a long while, life was looking up for Mizuki. Holy shit. All of you get in here. Yuminos finally snapped. And, it seemed that it was about to get better. Dropping his tea in the teacher's lounge, a group of his coworkers all turned to stare at each other, before they followed the shout of another one of their peers. Yumino, you're telling me that Pansy finally lost it? Took him a while. Mizuki could not help but agree. Yumino Iruka was one of his least favorite people in the world, perhaps, if only because the man was a venomous serpent who had chosen to hide his fangs and live as a glorified worm. He was a well-rounded shinobi, perfectly well-rounded. The idiot probably did not even realize how amazingly absurd it was to be talented at every major shinobi art, and be suitably knowledgeable in every minor one. Most Chunin focused on merely one, whereas those who had the potential for Jonin or special Jonin focused on two, and even then, they didn't have the aptitude necessary to be well balanced at 3 or more. Yumino, on the other hand, was a passable sensor, passable genjutsu specialist, passable taijutsu specialist, passable ninjutsu specialist, passable shurikenjutsu specialist, slightly below passable fuinjutsu and weapons specialist. There had been one person like that, a man who was a jack of all trades in his younger years, who had no special redeeming abilities or overwhelming clan bloodlines. All he had was a well-grounded base and talent for every shinobi art. That man eventually became the Sandaime Hokage. Yet, someone like Yumino had chosen instead to spend the rest of his life wiping noses and cleaning asses. A complete and utter waste. Mizuki felt that if he had the same aptitude Yumino did, there was no doubt in his mind that he would have become a special Jonin by now, if not Jonin or Anbu. You have to see this. I'm not sure if what Yumino is doing is allowed, or legal. Mizuki rose an eyebrow. Had the worm finally grown fangs? He, alongside a group of other teachers, made their way outside, where they found the class which they had dubbed the Clan Kids and Company, and Yumino Iruka, standing all around something large, white, and most certainly dangerous. Mizuki blinked. Is that a wolf?